As we approach the 20th anniversary of the September 11th terror attacks, pretrial hearings are resuming in Guantanamo Bay for 5 men accused of helping the 9/11 hijackers. The charges include conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism, hijacking, and intentional murder of civilians. This is the first time the suspects have appeared in court since February of 2020, right before the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Charges against the men were filed 9 years ago, but the proceedings have experienced several delays and remain in the pretrial phase. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge is in Guantanamo Bay for the proceedings, and she joins me now for more. Hi there, Catherine. You were among a handful of reporters inside the courtroom. Tell us, what did you observe?
Well, Elaine, I've been inside the high-security courtroom a number of times, and this morning I was struck by this atmosphere and energy like a long-awaited reunion. This was the first time the 5 defendants have been inside that high-security courtroom for about a year and a half. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the self-described architect of the attack, sits nearest the judge at the front of the courtroom. Today, to my eyes, he looked much older, much smaller. He had a long white beard that was tinted an orangey red at the sides. The other 4 defendants were deeply engaged with their lawyers. Many of them brought these large plastic footlockers that were filled with personal files. So it's always a somewhat surprising and sobering experience to be sitting in that courthouse and only about 15 yards away from the man who says he was the architect and the planner behind an attack that killed nearly 3,000 Americans. Elaine.
Yeah. And Catherine, I know you were reporting on this throughout the day. There were some issues related to the presiding judge. What were they?
Well, the judge in this case was originally assigned to the military commissions about a year ago, but he recused himself because he didn't have the required 2 years of time on the bench. Then he came back and was appointed again. It's pretty complicated, but for the time being, it looks like this judge is going to stay. He's at least the 4th who has been assigned full-time to the case. But it gives you a sense of these complex legal and thorny issues. This one in particular had us in court for only 2 hours before it recessed for the rest of the day, Elaine.
And, you know, Catherine, it is hard to believe that we are coming up on the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. And I think a lot of Americans might wonder about this process. Why has it taken so long just to get to this point today?
Almost every legal issue, Elaine, comes back to the men's detention before they were brought to Guantanamo Bay. After 9/11, the men were captured and held in the CIA secret prisons where they were subjected to interrogation tactics that critics call torture, including waterboarding and sleep deprivation. This evidence remains highly classified to this day and virtually off limits to the defense. The defense wants all of that CIA information thrown out of the case, but they also want FBI interviews that were done here at Guantanamo excluded from the case as well. They make the argument that these FBI clean teams that interviewed the men a second time had a lot of input into the CIA program. There was a lot of overlap. Therefore, the evidence gleaned from those interrogations, they say, is also contaminated by the CIA process.
So that's the defense argument. What is the prosecution side of things? What's their argument?
Well, the prosecution's position is that these men have been in court and essentially taken credit for the attacks of 9/11, and that virtually all of them are members of Al-Qaeda who were key facilitators based just on banking records and phone records for the plot itself. So let's say the CIA evidence never gets in, which is probably going to be the case. Let's say the FBI evidence from these so-called clean team interrogations at Guantanamo is excluded. The prosecutors are left with what amounts to a document case, the banking records, the phone records, telephone, electronic intercepts. And they probably can still make a case with a military jury that the men played a role facilitating the attacks of 9/11.
Well, since 2001, about 800 detainees have passed through Guantanamo Bay and 39 remain today. Catherine, as someone who has covered this and been to Guantanamo Bay a number of times, what are the arguments to ultimately keep it open or to close it?
Well, the Biden administration says it wants to close the Guantanamo detention camps. That's very separate from the naval base here in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. They want to close the detention camps. But what we've seen on the ground here, Elaine, is that a major construction project is going on, upwards of $5 million, to build an additional courthouse and to expand the workspace for classified information. So everything on the ground is telling you that they're certainly proceeding as if the operation is not going to close. I think there are two important points that are sort of the loose ends of the 9/11 story. One is that years ago, legislation was passed that prevented an administration from bringing the remaining detainees to the United States for trial in federal courts. And the second is that some of these men have been cleared for release back to their home countries, but their home countries simply don't want them. And when you speak with people privately here, they question whether the trial will ever happen, and they also question whether some of these forever detainees will ever go back to their home countries and may ultimately die here in the detention camps, because many of these men, I can't emphasize it enough, when you look at the 9/11 guys, they're late 40s, late 50s, but they've had hard lives, and they really look like very old men in that courtroom.
All right, Catherine Herridge reporting for us, bearing witness to this ongoing legacy of 9/11. Catherine, thank you so much.